Good. It's just started.
No
And this
swearing, guys.
is letter 3, the Empress.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start this morning by sharing this image of the Tetragrammaton, since Tomberg talks about this. He brings this up. This is what, the second letter he's brought up, the Tetragrammaton, and almost just casually. It is the Hebrew, which he doesn't draw in his book, which I wish he did. But on the left, reading from the right to the left, that image on the left, reading from the right to the left is Yod, He, Vav, He. Yod, He, Vav, He. And so that means Yahweh, if you think about what it were, or Jehovah, Yod, He, Vav, He. If you spell that out, it'd be YHVH. So Yahweh. So it is the name of God. And it has symbolic significance in the Kabbalah. It has, in just the way the letters are shaped, mean a lot. Now, the image on the right is the letters stacked from right to left, but they're up to down. So the Yod is on top, and then the first Yod He is the shoulders and arms. Vav is the image in the middle of the chest, and then He again repeated at the bottom. So it makes the human form. I didn't make up this idea. This is I learned this from Rabbi Rami Shapiro, who brought this image to our attention and drew it out vertically, like the image of man. So just to show you those two ways of writing it. The image on the right is the logo that from the logo I've developed for my new website. So I'm using that in my Magisterium website, which I'll send you all a link to as soon as it goes live. I think you'll find it interesting. So I thought that'd just be interesting to show you, so you understand, when you see that word, what does Tetragrammaton mean? Mm-hmm. It's the sacred name.
Alice, I wonder if you can answer this question. I seem to remember Tomberg saying that the Yod in the Tetragrammaton of the Empress is the magician. So you start off with the mysticism. The first He, which is a bit like that gateway with a gap at the top left, is sacred magic, isn't it?
Well, or gnosis, because
where does gnosis fit in? Because I'm not sure he's told us.
Because the top Yod would be the top pinnacle would be the mysticism, the mystical experience of divine consciousness, and then the first He. I know that the bottom He, the bottom, it represents the throne.
Yes.
The throne of manifestation. And in another book I have, the Empress is called, the book that I have, which is Paul Foster Case, and I'm not going to get into this, but it's a great cross-reference for me. The meditation on this says, I am the door. So if you look at that as I am the door of life, which refers to the feminine generative principle, okay, which is I am the door, and the meditation is on this is slightly different. This is a different interpretation, but it has some overlap with Tomberg. But here's the image of the Empress in Paul Foster Case's version. But in the beginning of it, it says, I am the door of life, the passage from the world of ideas into the world of form. Expressing myself, I take form in substance. but the power which worketh in that substance is the sovereign force of mind, outflowing ideas. And it goes on and on from there about the door of life. And she is sitting, her throne that she's sitting on, if you can see it, but it's a stone bench with just two, it doesn't have the wings behind it. The suggestion of the wings is sublimated into trees in this image. See the images, and then the dove, replaces the eagle. So there's differences, but I like to study them all because there's riches to be gained. So we can launch into it now. I'll stop the screen share if you would like to see each other a little bit. Have you seen it enough, you think?
Yeah, that was good.
Thank you, Alice.
I'll send that all to you just so you have it in your files. I'll send that by email to you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry Mark is not here. I just shot him an email, but don't know where he is. Did you find this letter a little bit more easygoing to get through?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it started to meld together the others, which made the others easier, the previous two letters,
Yeah.
to have a
it built-
foundation.
So the overarching theme of this this letter about the Empress is the Empress being the symbol of sacred magic. And for us to parse the phrase sacred magic, we have to break that down because we're used to using the word magic really in terms of just, visual sleight of hand, sorcery. We think of magic as being like maybe the magic of Disney or some such tripe, but it's not something that we don't take the word magic very seriously anymore. And it's extremely important here, as you can see. So it's a different view completely of what the operations of magic are and where they originate from. But so you have the elements, you have just the symbolic elements of the crown, and it's a two-tiered crown as opposed to the priestess, high priestess, which is a three-tiered crown. There's the crown, the scepter, and the shield. And those three are the main elements of the symbol. He talks about the incarnation, the mystery of incarnation is also brought in here. Again, this is another thing that you'll hear Tomberg talking about a lot. The mystery of incarnation, the mystery of the divine holy blood, which combines with human blood, which creates the forces of freedom in us, the forces of elan, vitality. And he goes on to talk about freedom of action, the freedoms from what? And he defines demons. He defines demons as human-made perversities, human tendencies, which become originate from doubt, fear, hate, apathy, and despair. He calls those the basics. And that the collective version of this is called egregores. Again, there's a lot of terms he introduces here, and I'm just running through them real quickly so we can unpack them. The collective egregores, such as Moloch and other gods, saying, they're not independent beings. Those are not independent devils. Those are not independent Satan. They're not independent. Those are creations of man. Those are man's twisted creations, perverse creations. And that they enslave us. And so we need to become free from those enslaving demonic ideas, basically. So the petrified wings, he talks about the petrified wings, which are the thrown back behind the image of the Empress. Those are sort of petrified wings, which become real wings through the use of the of sacred magic. He talks about magical formulae, the seven sacraments. He talks about the three elements of, before the fall was unio mystica, gnosis, and transformation. And then after the fall, it was effort, toil, suffering, and death. I'm unpacking all that, just to review it really quickly. And then the magic formula of I am the way, the truth, and the life. He unpacks that. Then he goes off into like etheric technology versus destructive technology. And he goes off on, I love the very end of it where he talks about faith, hope, and love. The three stages of mysticism: purification, illumination, and union. So that sums up the chapter for me. And we can just unpack that as best we can.
I also liked how he talked about the tree of life.
Yes.
And as part of the threes as well.
Oh yeah, the tree of life and the tree and how the tree is guarded by the cherubim.
Yes.
And why?
And then he described it as in the three parts, the fruit, and then science, science that is taking, putting forth the hand and taking, it's versus the willingness to serve, and then the tree of life, this unity of consciousness, and the beauty of the acorn, that explosion, that's an explosion too, versus the scientific atomic bomb.
Combustion, yeah. Yeah, it's a whole thing, and that's a whole other subject, etheric technology, because I've read a lot of teachings about etheric technology and the power of that. We haven't even begun to crush the surface of that as humanity. We haven't even, I don't think we've even found it yet. That's guarded by the cherubim, I suppose, that knowledge.
One question that I had, he was talking about the arsenal of arms, and there were three of those. One, the formula, well, that is the scripture primarily, that's a big part. And then two, the gestures, which would be the kneeling, the upright, the prostate, the benediction. And then he talks about the third one, the figures. And the figures, the only reference I saw in there were the figures were reproduced by the gestures. So the figures, what is the figures? What did you all see of the third? Those were the three: arsenal of arms, formula,
because I don't remember that. I must have.
Formula, gestures, and figures.
Very end.
Yeah, I ended up having to make notes because this is something. Okay, look on page 64. And kind of in the middle there. And he starts with the three, and he describes the formula, and that's the Holy Scripture. Specifically, he talked about the three gospels, John primarily, then the other three gospels, Book of Revelation, epistles, Acts of the Apostles, Psalms, Book of Genesis, Ezekiel, and the prophets, liturgical ritual, emerald table as well, and then the gestures, and he describes those as the kneeling down, the upright, and then the figures. The only reference that which I saw really just right here was the figures reproduced by the gestures.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
Does it mean diagrams?
I don't know. Is it diagrams? Then I'm thinking, okay, is it like hieroglyphics? Where the body figures are then represented?
Well, I would say that the tetragrammaton there that I showed you represents a figure.
Okay, that yes, but yes, okay,
That's an example. I mean,
that
and
would be an
that's
example.
directly from the word. Because the figures are, in the symbolism, those are in the symbolism of how symbols are conveyed to us. That conveys the formulae, gestures, and figures. That would be symbology, I would think, and sacred geometry and that sort of thing.
Yes,
That's my guess.
yes.
Because he talks also about the gestures that are made in the sacraments. He talks about the gestures that are made in the. Those are often using sacred geometrical shapes.
Mm-hmm.
There's sacred geometry in the actual gestures, like say of the Eucharistic gestures.
And also in the last sentence of that, he talks about the gestures that I think everybody, not just the priest would use, but everybody would sometimes to kneel, sometimes to be upright, sometimes to prostrate oneself. The gesture of the benediction. And people do gestures within, in church. In the Catholic Church, there's this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of gestures.
Mm-hmm.
And they are powerful. I mean, if you ever try the prostration, the kneeling and prostration, those are powerful body gestures. And of course, Muslims do that towards Mecca several times a day. They do the kneeling, the bowing, the prostrations, don't they? Those are very powerful. Grimoire in the arsenal. He calls it the grimoire. The arsenal of tools,
Of arms, yeah.
Yeah,
and that makes sense because I could understand the gestures and the formula, but I do think the figures is that sacred geometry. It's the tetragrammaton. I mean, I could just see hieroglyphics, that. Okay, thank you. That
very
was
interesting because he talks about how things are hidden, the way that things are hidden. He says mysteries are hidden by light, and secrets are hidden by dark. Secrets are hidden in the dark. And symbols are a mixture in that they are what he calls twilight. The symbols partake of some light, but they are also secrets, so they have some darkness to them. Very interesting, that. So I've talked to you before about how some things can be just hidden in plain sight. You could read something over and over and over again about a mystery or see something that represents a mystery, and you might comprehendeth it not. You might comprehendeth it not at all. And that would be not because it's not right in front of your nose, but because it's hidden in light. You are not able to see it because it's illuminated. If that makes sense. Just like there's in darkness, you can't see something because it's obscured, it's occulted. So the word occult comes from secreted. So he uses the word occultist a lot here. And occultism has a lot of secrets. And the secrets, a lot of the gestures, the symbols and all that, they use those are secret. And only initiates can use those coded symbols and meanings. So that's interesting to think about. That some things are hidden in darkness, completely hidden in darkness, but that when we're looking at the symbols of the meditations, the tarot cards, those symbols are neither light nor dark. They are giving hints of light through the image of the symbol, which is a twilight. So in a way, it kind of reduces the amplitude of the light So that something that might be just so completely, make you screw up your eyes and put sunglasses on because it's too bright to understand. It brings the brightness down a few notches so that you can see it in the form of a symbol. And that's how you can then unpack the mystery. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I must admit that for me, when that sort of experience occurs, it isn't so much because I feel blinded by what I can't understand. It is that I wouldn't actually see what I can't understand. And the symbol does at least point you in the right direction and give you a few handy hints.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that you're blind to it and that you can't see it. You just can't
Yeah.
see it. Not that it's overwhelming and you're just saying, oh, it's illuminating and you're just overwhelmed, but that you really are unable to see it.
Mm.
If you were to be exposed to a mystery that you don't understand, say you saw it in text form, in the symbol of letters, the word on a page, it would be like you would just read that over and over again and not be able to understand it at all. It just wouldn't penetrate. I've encountered teachings that way, where it just could not penetrate me. I wasn't ready to receive it.
And what occurred to me when I was reading that, talking about symbols in twilight, is I'm a member of a dream group. And when we discuss our dreams, when we unpack them, they're symbols. That's the language of the dream world, are symbols. And that is definitely twilight to see the unfolding of it. That's what that reminded me of.
Yeah, it gives you a handle. It gives you a substantive handle on something
Mm-hmm.
that you can then unpack. And, you may not even be able to verbalize it or completely comprehend it with your mind, but you can begin to comprehend it on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And the heart, I believe I've heard Lynn say, the language of the heart is actually symbols
Mm-hmm.
rather than discursive logic.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
certainly a few weeks ago, perhaps months ago now, I was given this rather nice picture of the God symbolized as a yellow sun at the top, streaming peace down into our heart, red heart at the bottom, which in turn makes healing possible for the tree of life going up the middle and then ending up returning to God. The interesting thing about that was that I felt I was being urged by God or guardian angel or whatever. I felt I was being urged not simply to talk about it and argue about it, but simply say, peace from the yellow sun down to the red heart, going up through the tree of life with healing, back to the yellow sun. Mm. And I wondered, why are they making me or encouraging me to do this kindergarten thing, yellow sun, red sun, green tree. And I think that might have been actually, okay, John, you're not very good at communicating these things, but your heart is pretty untutored too. So make an effort to speak in a language that your heart can understand. And so yellow sun and red heart and all that sort of thing. And I must say, it did seem to work.
It does. I remember when I last was studying the Tree of Life, and when I first really was exposed to it, and this book, it was one of the reasons. And I wrote a song. About it. It's on one of my albums. It's called Tree, and it's talking about the Tree of Life. with roots so deep and branches high. And it's a bossa nova, by the way. It's a bossa nova. It's a really nice little ditty, and it talks about a bird nesting in my branches, and the I am the tree of life. The bird is nesting in my branches, and its talons in my breast actually hurt. It talks about the talons of the bird. Weird little song, but it was my digesting through my artistic creative sense. It was my way of digesting that symbol.
Mm.
And I had a lot of strong imagery about the tree of life. I had sort of more of an animation visualization, which was, I visualized a tree growing with its branches, and then it flowering, and then the flowers turning into fruits, and then the fruits falling off back to the ground and sprouting again. That continual cycle, that cycle of life, the doorway of life coming in out of the divine realms. And those are powerful symbols, like we were talking about the acorn.
Mm-hmm.
Symbol of the acorn, very powerful symbol, because when you think about the generative force of a seed sprouting, that's etheric force. It's extremely force. It's the life force. And to think that we haven't really even learned how to really harness it yet. That's a whole subject in itself. But I once read a really, really far out thing, and to get your imagination going on this, I once read a far out thing. I can't remember where it was, but it was about spaceship technology. Get this, spaceship technology was based on fungus. Basically the energy of and it was explaining, it was an etheric energy. It was an etheric powered spaceship that was basically gigantic mushrooms. It was fungus, and it was some sort of activity of the fungus which created the energy for it to travel through dimensions. Actually, it's pretty wild.
Yes.
I know, just to spark your imagination about that.
Did you see the movie on fungus?
Energy. Oh my God. And we're not even talking about psychedelic mushrooms, I don't think.
Did you see the movie on fungus, Alice?
No.
Oh, you really should.
Yeah, it's very good.
I mean, they are, fungus is amazing.
It's like a documentary is really what it is.
A fungus
it
among us?
is.
They call it fungus among us or something like that?
What is it, Dory? I don't know the name. But you have the fungus up here, but it goes down below. It just goes through the whole earth. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's all interconnected.
There's some fungus like under the ground in Minnesota or something. It's miles and miles long. It's one organism, and it just extends for miles. I remember.
Yeah, it's called fantastic fungus.
Right.
Fungi. Oh. Fantastic fungi.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's a great movie to get. It really is very good. I wanted to describe a minute what I understood, and you all add to it differently if so. And this is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I am the way. That's the mystical union. That's the spontaneity. This is the magician. And then this is before the fall. And then after the fall, that is then replaced by struggle and toil. Then the truth. Now, this is gnosis. This is revealed truth. This is this new consciousness. This is before the fall. After the fall, suffering. And the life is the sacred magic. This is the transforming life. Before the fall, after the fall, death and destruction. That encapsulated for me was so helpful to put these together. Then he talks about faith, hope, and love. And it then is the opposite of that. So faith, this is divine breath and the source of magic. And then hope is divine light, all the revelations of gnosis. And in fact, that is the aim of gnosis, is hope. And then love is the divine fire. And this is the mysticism of the magician. And that is with, union with the divine. And, when I was thinking of love and fire, that just, it seems like such elements that go so naturally together. You just think of songs with fire and love, and that's the beginning. That's just the beginning of this whole process, truly. Anyway, so that was helpful for me to see those parts, how they all interconnected.
Yeah, I was trying to sort of think of the correspondence. You can see the correspondence of the first step, the divine union. That's effortless effort. The union, when you're in union with God, spontaneity. You can see that after the fall, that becomes toil and effort. That makes sense to me. Why does gnosis, being consciousness, why is the degenerate version of that suffering? That I found interesting. Transformation, death, I can see that. I can see the changing of forms, because he talks about the transformation of forms. That's that abiding essence that I've talked about, where there's an abiding essence, and so there is no death. But that middle one gets me. What do you think about that? Gnosis?
Yeah. You know what I thought about when I was
generating
trying to put those is the suffering is, it's like knowing it. It's knowing, it's being so aware of, it's being consciously aware, which caused that suffering. Because if you don't know, then you may not suffer. But that's how I kind of put that together. What about others?
Knowledge is often portrayed as a sort of teacher, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder if that has something to do with it. And also, you're talking about the fall, but I don't think, unless I am very much mistaken, that we're talking about the sort of fall which was everything was going lovely until Adam and Eve behaved badly and messed things up. As I understand it, the fall rather is us stumbling and groping our way along the path, which eventually does lead to God. But we have to make mistakes because we learn from our mistakes. And in this way, our mistakes are often painful and they do teach us. That's just my sort of bright ideas.
Suffering. So gnosis falls into ignorance, because the root of the word ignorance is gnosis. So gnosis, and basically like non-gnosis. It's a state of non-gnosis. Ignorance is non-gnosis, just as Gnostic and agnostic. So ignorant is not even agnostic, it's ignostic. It's unknowingness. And so I guess that's what it is. That is a state of suffering.
Well, and he describes as suffering for the awakening consciousness after the fall. Yes. So it could be the suffering of, your consciousness is awakened after the fall, and just, stay back from there, because now you know what you lost. It's that regret. You've got that pit of regret of, you goofed up, this is now you know it. Now you know how bad you screwed up.
But this goes back to that two-ness that now is generated, which we might say is kind of the essence of existence. There's the divine will and the human will. He talks about the two wills, and that the interaction of the two wills is critical to all of manifestation and to what the human mission is. You know, the human mission is to combine our will with the divine will. That's what the magus is. That's what the magician is. He's doing that. The magus and the action there, the manifestation, but the intersection between the divine will and the human will is the action of love. So then you have the Trinity. And you have what he calls the generator, the generatee, and the generated. I mean, you know, he tries to illustrate it several ways to you.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, it sets up that dynamic. It's a dynamic engine of the incarnation mystery, because, you know, the divine will, we had to fall away from the divine will to create those two loci, those two centers of consciousness, which are separate, which then creates that dynamic movement where love becomes the magic that brings us back into alignment with the divine will, into a new creation. Really, it's a new creation, right?
I am being drawn into heresy, I think, at the moment, because all of our talk is suggesting to me that creation on the one hand and the fall on the other are actually two sides of the same coin. Because if I understand the Kabbalah right, to start off with, you simply had God manifesting God in all sorts of different ways, and all was going absolutely beautiful. But God wanted to be in relationship. And to be in relationship, God had to withdraw himself so that from part of his, what had been emanating, so that had a real independence. Now, as soon as God is actually saying, okay, I am here, you are there, and we're going to have this relationship of love, then the creation is going to have to learn by experience what this means. And that means falling flat on your face, doing the wrong thing, suffering, and gradually learning, gosh, my situation is this. There is a God who cares for me out there. Let's see if we can begin to do a spot of reintegration. And so the falling down hasn't been things going wrong. They have been, it's a necessary consequence of God wanting to be in relationship rather than simply manifesting himself in all sorts of marvelous ways. But that is still God and not anything else. And so that actually sounds quite exciting to me. It's just a shame that it's so bloody painful.
But that's not heretical, is it, John? Because you're still saying it's all of one piece. It's all of God's creation. There's no dualism or division there, the Gnostic so-called dualism where you create the demiurge and these independent forces. It's not like that. They're all of one fabric. They're all from Ein Sof. In the Kabbalah, they all emanate from the Ein Sof.
Exactly. It's not heretical in that sense, but I think a lot of Christians would be uncomfortable at the idea is that the fact that we have fallen is not due to the misbehavior of Adam or Eve or the devil, but basically due to the behavior of God, who regarded this as a price worth paying for a union of two free wills, the divine will and our will. And that is wonderful and lovely. But I think you might find yourself in a bit of trouble if you said that too loudly in the wrong quarters.
if you said that to somebody who thinks literally, and this is where you come into those levels of consciousness that we talked about,
Mm.
the literal, the metaphorical, the moral, the anagogical, that's where you get into that. It's levels of consciousness, it's levels of understanding. And it's very important that everybody be compassionate about where they are on this spectrum, because everybody's at different levels. It really helps me to understand if I'm talking to somebody and they understand scripture on a literal level or even a moral level, but they really can't get past that. I stop. I won't, unless I feel invited into dialogue about going further with a metaphor and asking them to use their imaginative powers. I don't feel comfortable asking people to do that. Sometimes I'll go there and then I will pull back because I realize that made them very uncomfortable. So that's the challenge of people when you're in a teaching mode, is how do you approach or be compassionate towards others who, not saying that you're superior, but just saying that you're all at different levels of understanding.
Mhm.
And it's all good because it's all part of the path of return. When I talk to my son who's 32, and he likes to have talks with me about all this stuff, it's bizarre. I become completely incoherent when I try to talk to my son about the principles of life or anything metaphysical. I just become like this thick-tongued blah blah blah, and I hear this ridiculous stuff coming out of my mouth, and I just stop because I'm just like, and I think it's because the level of understanding where he is, it's a very strange place, because in some ways he's got a very deep understanding of some things. Others, he's very childlike. It's very hard to go into try to arrive at somebody else's consciousness and communicate with them when you're really not sure where they're comprehending, at what level they're comprehending things. So I find myself so most often just throwing up my hands and going, I don't know what to tell you. And that's when I realize God just actually wants me to just listen to him. Doesn't want me to try to solve his problems. I just have to listen to him. And that's the better part of wisdom sometimes, right?
Mm.
I become
That's
totally
also
incoherent.
one of the most,
I don't know what to say.
that's also one of the most important things. It's in order to talk with someone, you have to know where they are. And that's by, even just in daily life with, really mundane daily life. I have this real estate agent who calls me and she's all upset about her clients. She always seems to be upset about all of her clients. And I can't tell her enough times, ask them what they want. Ask them what they're thinking. And that's the only way we can communicate. And that's the only way I think we can also love, is to understand. If we don't understand or even try to understand where others are coming from, it's hard to have that love.
It is. And he talks about this here, about how saints, the action of saints, is not so much that they send out, but that they draw in. They draw in poisons into themselves. They sublimate through their very forces of their own love and their connection to the divine. They draw things to themselves out of others, and that's where they take on the suffering of others. Example of Francis with the people with the leprosy, and then he developed the stigmata, where you go, oh well, that could have just been the leprosy on his hands. Nonetheless, that's symbolic language to say that Francis took upon himself the suffering of others and transmuted it through his own body and gave it up to the divine. Now that's a very powerful thing to say.
Yes.
He describes it here through like plasma dynamics. It gets really strange when Tomberg goes, it's like this plasma. It's like a plasma force that exudes from the saint into, and they draw things. But think about that, like we were saying, if you stop and really listen to somebody, like Miller is asking this agent to do, that is part of that. You step aside, you step outside of your own individual will and you say, okay, not my will, Lord, but thy will be done. And thy will might be to just allow, let me really listen, let me really hear, and allow that reality of that person to infuse me. Sometimes that's extremely threatening. But if you have the armor of God on, if you feel protected by the divine love, then it's not threatening. It's truly healing, and that's how you can heal. He talks about that here, the divine authority that allowed Peter to go and heal Aeneas. Through Jesus Christ, through the word, he was empowered. He was crowned with the glory of the divine love to enable him to go and heal. He was given that authority to render that miracle, which is magic, which is sacred magic.
You know, which requires the divine will and the human will. You know, it requires both. It requires that action on the human part as well, taking that responsibility. The one part I thought was very exciting is the aim of the sacred magic, and it's liberation. It is to restore freedom, and freedom from, as Alice talked about, the perverse human tendencies. And that's the reason for the sacred magic after the fall, is to get that restoration of freedom, and freedom from that, all those tendencies that we know, that we live with, that they're our Achilles heel. You know, you can name them. What resentment, anger, envy, all of that.
Do you remember when in the scripture it says that Jesus went to visit John the Baptist when he was in prison, and he went to free him in his cell? Do you remember? I can't remember which gospel it is that says that, but it says that Jesus went to visit John the Baptist and to free him in his cell. It's vividly depicted in one of the movies, King of Kings or something, where you see the shadow of Jesus outside the cell, and you see John the Baptist looking up, and the light into the light of the window of the cell through the bars, and then the shadow of Jesus comes across the bars, and his hand reaches in and grasps John. And then John just has this beatific smile that just envelops his whole face of being. So he's being freed from all those things, the fear, the doubt, the hate and the apathy, all the despair that he's feeling. He's freed from that by Jesus in the cell. Do you remember that? I think this very poignant moment.
I think that is the film being creative in a very good way.
It's
I
creative.
don't think it's in the Gospels.
Not in the Gospels. I'm sorry. That was but it should be, because
Yes.
very powerful. That's a very powerful scene. I mean, I remember that scene from when I was 12 years old watching that.
I mean, Cecil B. DeMille may have been a strange guy in many ways, but he did actually manage to do some pretty impressive things. I mean, Ben-Hur, I think, is a religiously impressive film.
Yeah.
As well as the chariot race and the sea battle and all the other things that we really are interested in.
This gets to the I think it's a very important point that Tomberg makes about the connection of sacred magic to divine sources of revelation. And so he talks about, how sacred gnosis, the generative energy of the divine, being in the background. I'll give you an example. All art in the Middle Ages was sacred art. There was no separation between the world of the sacred and the world of art. You might say this is also really true in indigenous cultures, Aboriginal cultures. Their art is usually intertwined absolutely with their ritual, with their cultural understanding of the divine, is always interlocked with their art. Then there comes, in our culture, there's a separation. So my example is this: when I sing medieval chant, I love singing medieval music because medieval music is it's sacred art. It's got its connection directly to the revelatory element of the sacred, and it's very much conscious of that relationship. When I sing Renaissance madrigals, as aesthetically fun and delightful as they may be, fa la la, I feel it's really trivial, and they are no longer hymns, they are songs. And in fact, in Renaissance times, they took some of the more beautiful elements of sacred songline from hymns, and then put profane words in there. Put profane words in where there were sacred words before. It's absolutely, to me, very blasphemous. And I have a hard time. I sing in a madrigal group. I sing Renaissance madrigals. And I tell you, I don't like it. I don't like singing the Renaissance madrigals. We do a Christmas program for the first concert where we do all the Christmas music, and I'm in heaven because we have to do religious music there. So we have to hit the canon of, you know, the even the Renaissance people who had to nod to the religious. But when we get into the madrigal fa la las, where they're just singing it about people romping through the hills and, you know, making whoopee, that really, I really don't enjoy it.
What are the composers of Renaissance madrigals? Who are the composers?
What composers?
Yes.
Oh, well, the one I dislike the most is Morley. Thomas Morley, is that his name? The English guy, sorry, really, really cannot stand his stuff. Can't stand it. It's just, it makes my teeth go on edge every time. But I would rather sing a severe, austere Hildegard von Bingen chant, which is monophonic with maybe just a like a drone underneath it. I am in heaven singing that. You make me sing one of these English madrigals, and I just want to gag. I can't wait to get it over with. It's really strange, and that's when I began to realize that my voice, I want to hitch my voice only to that which has a sacred revelatory background. I'm not interested in the trivial aesthetics of art at all. And he talks about that, the trivialization of art, the trivialization of the sciences and art. But I just wanted to focus on the arts. He talks about, you know, hymns became songs, and very sacred gestures just become these silly dances. There's a disconnect between the arts and the sacred, and they become trivialized.
You know, I am seeing that it's right now a little after 10, and I know, well, and I know I've got to run, and I know others too.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I wanted to go back to what you were saying about freedom. Freedom from envy, freedom from all of these things. One of the things he says here as the aim of sacred magic is to give the freedom to see, to hear, to walk, to lead, to live, to follow an ideal, and to be truly oneself. So it's not just freedom from, it's freedom towards.
That's a great point.
Freedom to ascend, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because at the very beginning of the chapter, he refers to it as the aim, you know, is liberation, you know, liberating, and connecting it with the fall. But isn't that beautiful? Because it's that transformative freedom too. You know, it's nothing negative. It's both. It's both. That's beautiful. Thank you.
And so when you go through practices like the presence process, you're aware of perceiving that you're becoming free from certain things, and those things die. So they might be perceived as a death, but actually it's a transformation. So it's you learn to shift your perspective from death to transformation, the pre-fall perspective. Right?
But isn't that what death is anyway?
What, Millet?
Isn't that what death is anyway? It's a transformation?
Yes, but a lot of people are deathly afraid of it. They're afraid of it because they're deathly afraid of losing their form. They're afraid of losing this form. But what you have to become free from is that fear of losing form. I think a lot of evil in the world and things that are out of whack right now are perpetrated by people's fear of death, radical fear of death. And the problem is when you have a terrible fear, it can be manipulated. And you become more and more distorted and displaced from the reality of divine life. Anyway, that's I'm not gonna, but that's a really good point. It's liberation from, and it's towards. It's not just liberation from psychopathology and neuroses and fixed ideas he talks about. It's freedom to leave those behind and freedom to move towards completely different worldview and paradigm.
Because he refers to this as transforming life.
Transforming life.
It's changed. This is so good. Alice, I'm so glad you introduced this to us. It's, it's something to study. It's important. I find myself thinking about it throughout the day too.
The meditations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's it takes a lot of digesting, and some of the ideas can seem kind of alien, like when he goes off really deeply on talking about like the holy blood, or you gotta kind of put aside I find I often have to just put aside my prejudices and points of view and just go with Tomberg. I don't need to take it all as gospel. I just let it ride through me. And those parts which I find valid to digest, wonderful. But the rest, I don't need to take it all in, because of course he's only human. He's got his limitations too, and his perspective.
Yeah, that's great.
But fascinating. So good job with this one. And listen, if we get past this third Arcanum, I congratulate you all, because I don't think most groups get past the first three. I think a lot of people get bogged down at this point and just go no further. They just kind of go, oh boy.
Well, we're down to 4. We're good.
But don't get discouraged. It does get better. And again, a lot of this is just, Tomberg's getting into his worldview and playing in that, just allowing yourself to play with that, and not get too hung up on it all. It's very rich, but it's also not, you're not meant to take it all in one reading. I'm now on my second or third reading of these, and it's helpful. But like you said, Dory, you just absorb stuff. It plays in your consciousness all week long.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to play with these ideas. Mm-hmm. It's that effortless effort which the magician represents, where you're just playing with these ideas. And it's a really good exercise to learn to just play with ideas, play with things, rather than being like dogmatic about things. That's an exercise in itself.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Thank you all. Thank
you,
Alice.
Thank you. Story, and good luck, John. Good luck, Miller. We'll see you next time
in 2 weeks, and we've got the Emperor.
Take care and God bless.
Take care. God bless.
Alice, stay on a second, if you will.
Sure, I will. I'll send you guys a tetragrammaton also.
Because what I want to do is see if I was trying to stop the recording.